you jabronis. Been telling us for how long? You guys have been going into our public schools, elementary schools. I'm a product of this here in this country. Of people coming into my school at the age of 6, 7, 8, 9 years old telling me the world is going to end unless I act now. Now you're telling me that's a lie? Huh. We are winning the war of ideas, whether it be the carbon tax, which Carney admitted, well, I had to zero it because everyone else agrees with the conservatives that that was wrong and that we needed to get rid of it. And then, or it could be the safe supply, where Premier David Eby in BC admitted that was a bad policy and it's not been working. Or maybe crime, where police association after police association are coming forward saying, please do something about this. It's getting out of control and there's nothing we can do about it. And people are starting to realize their lives are starting to become drastically worse in some of these communities across our country because crime is not being dealt with because liberal policies have said, nah, we're not going to do much about it. And they're losing that battle as well. And now the latest, Bill Gates, the king of climate change himself, the king of mandatory trial vaccines, the guy who's not a doctor, but all of a sudden everyone listens to him, the billionaire. He finally wrote an essay admitting and relenting on some of his positions around climate change. And do you know what? Donald Trump didn't waste any time letting him know about it. And well, this actually signals something very interesting for our country. Well, because our country bought into elbows up. Our country bought into the Mark Carney grift. Our country bought into this guy coming from the outside who hadn't been in the country in over 15 years, being our prime minister, and he writing a book saying climate change is a threat to our humanity. Capitalism is a threat to humanity. And the things that Bill Gates writes about flies in the face of Mark Carney's goals and beliefs that he has publicly stated. And oh baby, it's going to get interesting, and we're going to talk about all of it. Welcome to the Elevated Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. If you get any value from today's episode, take the time to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us to grow. It helps us get to new audiences. It helps people see that there's something different than what the mainstream media has to offer. Now, let's get into our first story, shall we? As I said, Mr. Donald Trump didn't waste any time letting everyone know how he felt about Bill Gates' latest essay. It says, brackets, we just won the war on the climate change hoax. Bill Gates has finally admitted that he was completely wrong on the issue. It took courage to do so. And for that, we are all grateful. My God. Classic Donald Trump fashion. So to give some perspective, did Bill Gates completely relent on his perspective of climate change? No. Does he still think it's an issue? Yes. Does he still think governments should mobilize to end the issue? Yes. However, there are some key topics. There are some key talking points that he is completely flipped on and relented. One of which coming in the first paragraph of his essay, and you catch this. There's a doomsday view of climate change that goes like this. In a few decades, cataclysmic climate change will decimate civilization. The evidence is all around us. Just look at all the heat waves and storms caused by rising global temperatures. Nothing matters more than limiting the rise in temperature. Fortunately for all of us, this view is wrong. Is it? Because I'm pretty sure you were on team the Earth is going to die in 20 years. For how long now? Has it been 20 years at this point? You, Al Gore, Mark Carney, all you jabronis been telling us for how long? You guys have been going into our public schools, elementary schools. I'm a product of this here in this country. Of people coming into my school at the age of 6, 7, 8, 9 years old telling me the world is going to end unless I act now. Now you're telling me that's a lie? Huh. Interesting. We move on. Although climate change will have serious consequences, particularly for people in the poorest countries, it will not lead to humanity's demise. People will be able to live and thrive in most places on Earth for the foreseeable future. Oh, imagine that. Emissions projections have gone down, and with the right policies and investments, innovation will allow us to drive emissions down much further. Unfortunately, the doomsday outlook is causing much of the climate community to focus too much on near-term emissions goals, and it's diverting resources from the most effective things we should be doing to improve life in a warming world. It's not too late to adopt a different view and adjust our strategies for dealing with climate change. Next month's Global Climate Summit in Brazil, known as COP30, is an excellent place to begin, especially because the summit's Brazilian leadership is putting climate adaptation on and human development high on the agenda. This is a chance to refocus on the metric that should count even more than emissions and temperature change, improving lives. Our chief goal should be to prevent suffering, particularly for those in the toughest conditions who live in the world's poorest countries. Imagine that. Imagine, I don't know, was this the thing that Pierre Poilievre was talking about all last election? Crazy idea that you can still use conventional energy to still improve lives, to make sure people are healthy, make sure everything's good, make sure you ship our LNG over to China, displace their coal plants, bring down those emissions, burn a little cleaner, and still make money and allow your country to thrive. I'm pretty sure that was Pierre Poilievre's stance last election. Oh, pretty sure I didn't see Bill Gates come out and say nothing about that. That's crazy, isn't it? The reason why this is kind of nuts is because how does it feel to be gaslit for decades on end at this point? And the guy who's the head honcho of all this whole thing is coming out admitting the very thing that we've been talking about for decades. Really? Is the world going to end? Are we on the brink of human extinction? You've been saying this since the 80s. Now here we are, 45 years later. We're still standing. Interesting. Very interesting. He goes on to say this. Again, as I said, he doesn't relent fully on his positions on climate change. However, he changes specific key talking points that are really big in the long run. He goes on to say this: although climate change will hurt poor people more than anyone else, for the vast majority of them, it will not be the only or even the biggest threat to their lives and welfare. Really? I've been told different for the past how many years? That this is the existential threat to us. It will be the end of humanity. Now you're telling me it's not the worst thing facing us? Interesting. They say the biggest problems are poverty and disease, just as they always have been. Understanding this will let us focus our limited resources on interventions that will have the greatest impact for the most vulnerable people. Fascinating. It's almost like that's how our Western civilization was built and helped it become one of the most successful civilizations and societies of all time, was conventional energy. When you strip people of energy, you get rid of electricity, you get rid of all the innovations that have made lives easier. All of a sudden, things get worse. People go hungry. People can't feed themselves. They can't warm themselves, and they die. But I've been told, especially in the Canadian zeitgeist, that if you don't have this suicidal empathy about climate, you're a bad person. And you should be treated as such, because you are a threat to humanity if you believe in conventional energy. As I said, he's not relenting fully on, hey, we need to go green, this, that, the other. However, he's acknowledging that, on the priority list, this is actually dropping now, admitting that it isn't all that it was cracked up to be. Then he goes into health and prosperity. Needing to focus on health and prosperity is the way to keep people alive and improve our society. He says a few years ago, researchers at the University of Chicago's Climate Impact Lab ran a thought experiment. What happens to the number of projected deaths from climate change when you account for the expected economic growth of low-income countries over the rest of the century? The answer: it falls by more than 50%. This finding is exciting because it suggests a way forward. Since the economic growth that's projected for poor countries will reduce climate deaths by half, it follows that faster and more expansive growth will reduce deaths by even more. And economic growth is closely tied to public health. So the faster people become prosperous and healthy, the more lives we can save. Oh my gosh, it's almost like we've been telling you guys this for decades at this point. This whole crazy stance of like, everything's green energy, we gotta do this, and it was clearly not the right solutions. Clearly wasn't improving lives, but it was bringing down emissions, even though it wasn't, barely. But billions and billions and billions of dollars was pumped into this machine, where a lot of wealthy people got rich in the process, and the general population got poor. Funny how that works. And now they're coming at the end of it, realizing it's at the end of the rope. People are starting to realize this is not working. Lives are still okay. Things are going okay. Maybe the best way forward is health and prosperity. And how do you do that? Having booming economies that are based off conventional energy. They slightly admit to the conventional energy piece in this essay, but they really try, but we got to focus on these innovations. That's how we move forward. Again, they don't fully surrender the point, but they are getting there. But the reality is this, and we all know it. It's more that the manipulation is starting to wear off. They're not going to fully admit that they've been lying and trying to manipulate you for money. However, they're going to recant a little bit out of control because they're losing the war of ideas in the public square. From the standpoint of improving lives, using more energy is a good thing because it's so closely correlated with economic growth. This chart shows countries' energy use and their income. More energy use is a key part of prosperity. It's just, as I said, it's good because it's showing that we're winning the debate. It showed that we're winning the war of ideas. That even their head honcho of their big religion of climate is admitting to the things that we've been saying the whole time. Wild. He says here, unfortunately, in this case, what's good for prosperity is bad for the environment. Although wind and solar have gotten cheaper and better, we don't have yet all the tools we need to meet the growing demand for energy without increasing carbon emissions. But we will have the tools we need if we focus on innovation. With the right investments and policies in place over the next 10 years, we will have a new affordable zero carbon technologies ready to roll out at scale. Add in the impact of the tools we already have, and by the middle of the century, emissions will be lower, and the gap between poor countries and rich countries will be greatly reduced. Holy smokes, I swear. Like, it's wild. This was the argument made to Trudeau in 2015. He wanted to abandon Alberta and oil, liquefied natural gas, all of it, for the sake of the green grift. And look what's happened to our country since. Now here we are 10 years later, the idol. Bill Gates is like, economies of scale, countries that do well are built off conventional energy. Imagine that. We do need to find a way to bring down emissions, but this is the way to go forward. And we just need to look at innovation that can bring down these emissions. Kind of like what I've been saying on the show for a long time. Conventional energy first, and bring in green aspects to fill in, to supplement various parts of your supply chain. But it isn't a replacement, because that's absolutely silly. Second last point on this essay I want to bring up is he talks about farming in a specific poor country. And when I was reading it, I was like, this literally could be Canada. It was fascinating. He says, for example, a few years ago, the government of one low-income country set out to cut emissions by banning synthetic fertilizers. Farmers' yields plummeted. There was much less food available, and prices skyrocketed. The country was hit by a crisis because the government valued reducing emissions above other important things. Sometimes the pressure comes from outsiders. For example, multilateral lenders have been pushed by wealthy shareholders to stop financing fossil fuel projects with the hope of limiting emissions by leaving oil, gas, and coal in the ground. Oh my gosh. All right, Stephen Gilboa, anybody? This pressure has almost no impact on global emissions, but it has made it harder for low-income countries to get low-interest loans for power plants that would bring reliable electricity to their homes, schools, and health clinics. Granted, situations like these are complicated since burning fossil fuels helps people now at the cost of making the climate worse for people in the future. But remember that climate change is not the biggest threat to the lives and livelihoods of people in poor countries, and it won't be in the future. In the next section, I'll explain why and what it means for our climate strategies. Yeah, it's not good for us in the future. Again, if you're going to operate in this frame of mind that Bill Gates is operating in. Okay, climate change is still a very bad thing. It's going to really hurt us in the future. However, it's not the worst thing we're dealing with. So let's help out people now with conventional energy. What I love most, though, was talking about how wealthy shareholders and multilateral lenders have stopped financing fossil fuel projects with the hope of limiting emissions. Do you know who that sounds like? I don't know. Mark Carney's net zero initiative with all the big banks. You remember this? 4 of Canada's biggest banks have left the UN-backed Net Zero Banking Alliance that aims to accelerate climate action among financial institutions. Banks including BMO, National Bank, TD Bank Group, and CIBC confirmed Friday they were no longer members. The withdrawals from the alliance followed departures by the 6 largest banks in the U.S. in recent weeks ahead of the presidential inauguration of Donald Trump. Financial institutions are pulling back following sustained criticism from U.S. Republicans on various climate alliances and the very concept of factoring environmental risks into their business operations. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, left the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative earlier this month in a move that led the group to suspend activities and launch a review of the initiative, citing recent developments in the U.S. Shareholders, multinational lenders, putting pressure to not use fossil fuel, go after fossil fuel projects, leave things in the ground. That is 100% the exact definition of the policy stance of Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, Stephen Guilbeault, and the list goes on. Now, the priest of their religion, Mr. Bill Gates, is saying, actually, no, we need to start getting those fossil fuel projects going again. Goodness gracious. The thing that's like, I'm only laughing because I would cry if I didn't. Because of how much pain these policies have put our country in, how much pain it's put people that watch the show in. I don't take those things lightly. And not only have you Donald Trump putting pressure to bring manufacturing back to the US, pulling manufacturing out of our country. We've also had all these EV plants that we've retrofitted, financed, that haven't been selling, further impoverishing our country. That was happening long before the Donald Trump stuff kicked up, long before it. It'd just be nice to have a government that actually looked out for our needs rather than themselves, wouldn't it? But let's talk about these specific points again. Let's sum this all up. Big things that Mr. Gates hit here is the doomsday outlook is not necessary. We don't need to have that anymore. It's not the worst thing that we're facing right now. Right now, the worst things that we're facing are poverty and disease. Imagine that. Money designated for climate initiatives. Are they being spent in the right places? He said no. We need to be better with the money that's being invested when it comes to energy. That investing money into health and prosperity is the best defense into improving society and poverty. And then as well is the pressure to keep fossil fuel projects in the ground needs to end because they actually are going to help us bridge that gap into the future. So we need to knock that off immediately. So this is the conclusion of the essay, Mr. Bill Gates. I just want to put direct contrast of Mark Carney's book, Values, the points that he's brought up in his book. He defined climate change as an existential threat, where he consistently throughout his book referred to climate change as an existential threat and an existential risk. He often referred to climate change as the tragedy on the horizon, where he would catastrophize climate change and how it's going to end our society, end us as a human race. He made sure to reiterate that multiple times. And another thing that he would reiterated is having a carbon budget, putting pressure on big companies, putting pressure on financiers to stop funding fossil fuel projects. That's how you have a better future. Those are the conclusions that Mark Carney came to in his book, Values, which spits in the face of what Bill Gates wrote here in this essay. The thing is, Bill Gates has a lot of play on the far left and their climate ideologies. The problem is, what happens to Bill Gates? Do they exile him? Because they've been working on this fear-mongering campaign for decades at this point. As I said, I'm a 33-year-old man, and they came into my schools at the age of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, at least once a year. Throughout the time I was in elementary school, middle school, high school, telling us all about the existential threat that climate change poses to humanity. So when you reiterate that message to a group of kids who now believe that wholeheartedly, you can't just reverse course with one essay. And the way things have gotten so extreme in people's views and the action they'll take if you offend their views, I'll be curious what happens next for Mr. Bill Gates once this article really hits the mainstream. And you can help me do that by sharing this video. But tonight, myself and Reg will be doing a live stream this evening. We'll be covering all this and more of all the things that are going on. Are we going to have what's going to happen with the budget next week? Are we going to go to election? This, that, the other. We're going to be talking about all of it tonight at 8:15 Eastern time. Looking forward to having you. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.